"Move it, Mama. The floor can wait. The rest of us can't." Verna Colley did not move. She ran the mop out, pulled it back, ran it out again, the same slow figure 8 she'd been making across that gym floor for 2 years and 4 months. "You hard of hearing. I heard you." She wrung the mop into the bucket, one hand over the other, and looked up at him with an expression that had nothing in it at all. "I just wasn't in a rush." Coach Locke laughed because there were 9 phones in the room and every one of them was pointed at him. He put the toe of his cross-trainer against the yellow bucket and tipped it over. Gray water spread across the mats in a long tongue. "Now you're in a rush." Verna set the bucket upright. She rolled her sleeves. She always rolled them before she knelt. And under the left cuff there was a scar the shape of a fishhook and a tattoo gone the color of an old bruise, a regimental crest nobody in that building had ever asked about. She was 59 years old, 5'6", and she cleaned that gym 6 nights a week. I've been telling stories on this channel for a long time. This one I keep coming back to, and I think it's because of what he said next and how sure he was when he said it. "Tell you what," Coach Locke said, spreading his arms for the cameras. "Friday morning, you and me on the mat. Nothing serious, just for laughs." He didn't know that the woman with the mop had spent 27 years teaching Canadian soldiers how to take apart men exactly like him. Verna's alarm went off at 4:40 every morning, and every morning it was late. Her body had been getting up at 4:35 since 1985, and no amount of retirement had talked it out of the habit. She sat on the edge of the bed with her feet flat on the cold floor and worked the stiffness out of her hands, knuckle by knuckle, the way you'd unfold a road map that had been in the glove box too long. Then she went down and put the kettle on. The house was in Bible Hill, just across the river from Truro, Nova Scotia, a bungalow with brown siding, a carport with a bad hinge, and a kitchen window that faced east so the first gray light landed on the counter where she made her tea. Strong, no sugar, in the mug with the chip out of the rim. Emmanuel had bought her that mug at a church sale in 1998 because it said "World's Okayest Wife," and he'd thought that was the funniest thing anybody had ever printed on anything. Emmanuel had been gone 4 years. He'd gone out to clear the driveway during a February storm, and his heart stopped between the front step and the truck, and a neighbor found him 20 minutes later with the shovel still in his hands. Verna didn't talk about it. She kept his reading glasses in the drawer beside the tea bags. She kept his side of the bed made. She kept moving, because moving was the only trick she'd ever learned that worked on everything. At 5'5" she walked. Not ran, not anymore. Her left knee had opinions and she'd stopped arguing with it around 60 pounds of Kandahar dust ago. But she walked 4 kilometers every morning in every kind of weather this province could invent. Down Pictou Road, past the school, along the dike trail where the tide came up the Salmon River twice a day like something breathing, up the hill past the Legion, and home. In January she wore a toque with a pom-pom. Her granddaughter had knit crooked. She wore it anyway. Her son Terence lived in Fort McMurray and called Sunday nights. He asked if she was eating. She said she was. He asked if she'd thought any more about the pension paperwork. She said she had, which was not exactly true. Nobody in Bible Hill knew what she'd done for a living. They knew she'd been in the forces, I think. They knew she cleaned nights at the gym on Roby Street and did the church basement Wednesdays. Roy Pelletier at the hardware store called her the quiet one with real affection and no idea. Hazel Amiral at the Irving poured her coffee before she asked for it. That was the arrangement Verna had made with the world, and for 11 years the world had honored it. The gym on Roby Street had been a curling rink until 2011. You could still see where the ice sheets had been if you knew where to look. 4 faint seams under the rubber flooring, running the length of the building like the ghosts of something more polite. Braden Locke moved his operation in on the 1st of November. He was 26. He'd won a regional grappling circuit twice and a national qualifier. Once, he had a black belt hanging in a shadow box, and he had 180,000 people following an account called Locke Combat Club, where he posted 40-second clips of himself throwing teenagers. He chose the Roby Street building for 3 reasons. The rent was nothing, the ceilings were high, and there were always people in there, Actual people mid-workout who would stop what they were doing and watch. You cannot fake an audience. Braden understood that better than he understood almost anything. He noticed Verna on his second day. Hard not to. The gym opened at 5 and she was usually finishing up, and sometimes when she finished early, she would go to the heavy bag in the back corner, the one with the electrician's tape wrapped around the split, and hit it for 20 minutes before she went home. Not hard. That was the thing. She hit it the way you'd knock on a door you weren't sure anyone was behind. "Check out the cleaning lady," Braden said to Nolan Baudry, who was 19 and drove 40 minutes each way from Stewiacke because Coach Locke had once told him he had potential. Nolan laughed. Nolan always laughed. That was, in a sense, his job. But Braden kept watching, and what bothered him was not the punches. It was everything else. Her feet were always underneath her. Her chin never came up. When she moved around the bag, she moved in a small orbit, never crossing her ankles, never giving anything away. And when she stopped completely, the way water stops. There was something in it he couldn't name. It sat at the back of his skull, like a word he'd forgotten. He shook it off and posted a clip of himself doing a flying armbar with the caption levels. The next morning she was there again. Same corner, same bag, same rhythm. She never once looked at him. Everybody in that building looked at Braden Locke. That was the whole architecture of his life. And the 59-year-old woman with the mop and the scarred forearm went about her business as though he were a light fixture. He could not have said why that felt like an insult, but it did. And it kept feeling like one. And it grew. It started the way it always starts. Small. The first week it was volume. Braden ran his warm-ups louder when she was in the corner. "See, this is what happens when you don't have coaching. You just slap leather for 30 years and think you're doing something." His students laughed on cue. Verna kept hitting the bag. Second week he came closer. He moved his drilling space over to the mats nearest her corner. Though the building had 4,000 square feet and he'd never needed that corner in his life, he needed her to look. "Hey, Auntie." He said it, while everyone was breathing hard, casual, tossed off. "You ever kick? Or just hands?" Verna caught the bag with her palm and let it settle. "I do all right. She does all right," Braden repeated to the room, delighted, holding it up like something he'd caught. "That's what my Nan says about her bingo." More laughter. Verna went back to work. By the end of that week, he'd stopped bothering with the friendly mask. She'd come out of the change room on a Thursday, mop in one hand, and Braden was mid-demonstration. A takedown he liked because it made a sound. His students clapped. A couple of the regulars nodded from the squat racks. He drank it in the way he always did, and then he turned around and found her standing there with a bucket, waiting for him to move so she could get at the floor. He walked over, stood close enough that it was a decision. Real talk. He was smiling. He was always smiling. "What are you even doing here every day? You're not getting stronger. You're not getting faster. You're just here." Verna looked at him. "Same as you, working." "Nah." He crouched, so their eyes were level, so his students could see him crouch. "See, I'm building something. You're just running out the clock." "You finished?" "Almost." He stood, took out his phone, and pointed it at her face. "Hold that for me. My people love a what not to do." He hit record, and Verna Colley, for the first time in 3 weeks, stopped what she was doing. She didn't stand up fast. She didn't raise her voice. She set the mop against the wall, straightened, and looked at him with an expression that made Nolan Baudry take a half-step backward without understanding why he had. "Put it away." Braden lowered the phone an inch. Or you'll find out what I do here every day." Nobody said anything. The heaters ticked. Somebody's playlist kept going in the far corner, a song about summer. Braden put the phone in his pocket. He turned to walk away. Then he did the thing he always did when he felt small, which was get loud. "You know what? I'm sick of you taking up space in here." 20 people stopped. Plates settled onto racks. "You want to prove you're not just some worn-out old woman with a bucket. Friday. Right here. Nothing serious. I'll even let you write the rules." He opened his arms to the room. "Just for laughs." Verna looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the silence became an answer of its own kind, though nobody there could read it. Then she picked up her bucket, walked it to the utility sink, poured it out, and left. Nolan posted the clip that night. Coach called out the cleaning lady Inga Friday's gonna be a movie. It had 11,000 views before he fell asleep. What none of them knew was that Verna Colley drove home the long way, sat at her kitchen table with the light off, and looked at her hands for an hour and a half. She hadn't said yes, but he'd said worn out, and that word had gone in somewhere old and lodged there, glowing like a coal that wouldn't cool. 2 mornings before Friday, she stopped at the Irving for coffee. There was a man at the counter, 70s, Stanfield sweatshirt, hands like a lobsterman's. He watched her come in. He watched her set her cup down, watched her turn to reach for the milk without moving her feet, watched her step around a puddle by the door without ever appearing to look at it. "Can I ask you something?" Verna said, "Sure." "Were you a fighter?" She almost laughed. "Why would you ask me that? It's the way you move." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "My brother moved like that. He never told anybody either." Verna paid for her coffee. At the door, she stopped. "I know how to take care of myself," she said, and went out into the cold. Some people see, most don't. The difference is usually how badly a person needs to be seen themselves. She almost didn't go. She woke at 4:40, kettle, mug with the chip. She stood at the window and watched the light come up gray over the Cobequid Hills. And she thought about a stretch of ground at CFB Gagetown in the spring of 2004 and a recruit named Wesley who kept asking her why they trained hands when they had rifles. "Because somebody's going to get close enough to touch you one day," she'd told him, "and the rifle won't help you. What helps you then is whatever your hands already know." Her hands knew too much. That was the whole trouble. She put on her coat and drove to Roby Street and walked in at 6:32. The mats were already down. Braden had laid them out in a square, 6 meters by 6, and his students stood along the edges in their giz with their phones up. The place was full, not just the regulars. Half of Bible Hill was in there. Roy Pelletier had left the hardware store dark. Hazel came off her shift and didn't take her coat off. There were 4 kids from the high school who had not troubled themselves to invent a reason for being out of first period. 30-some people had come to watch a black belt spar a cleaning lady for laughs. There she is. Braden clapped his hands. The woman of the hour. "I was starting to think you'd bailed on me." Verna set her bag against the wall and said nothing. "Here's the deal." He was talking to the crowd more than to her. 3 rounds, 2 minutes. Light contact, points, clean strikes only. No takedowns, no grappling, no ground. "My house, my rules." He said it with the easy confidence of a man who had written the rules to suit himself and expected no argument. Verna knelt, unzipped her bag, and took out a roll of hand wrap. Cotton, faded to the color of weak tea, fraying at one end. She began to wrap. Between each knuckle, a tuck at the wrist, the same wrap 10,000 times. "You hear me? Points. Tap, if it hurts. I heard you." "Good," he turned. "Somebody get a timer up and record all of it." Verna pulled off her sweater, gray t-shirt underneath, same as always. The old crest on her forearm caught the fluorescent light and meant nothing to anybody in that room. She stepped onto the mat with her hands at her sides. She looked at Braden Locke the way you look at a chore. He bounced into the center, snapped 3 kicks in the air, 1, 2, 3, sharp enough to draw a murmur. "Whenever you're ready, Mama." Verna rolled her neck, and then she did something that made his smile flicker for less than a second. She changed her stance. It wasn't boxing, it wasn't karate or Muay Thai or anything Braden Locke had ever taught a paying customer. Her feet went shoulder width and stayed under her hips, her knees bent maybe 8 centimeters. Her hands came up open, palms, not fists, elbows welded to her ribs, chin tucked behind her left shoulder, and she wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his chest. Nolan Baudry, standing at the edge with his phone up, felt something go cold and heavy in his stomach. He'd never seen that stance in a single video, ever. There was nothing in it for a camera. There was nothing in it at all except a total absence of anything wasted, and some part of Nolan's animal brain understood what that meant a full 10 seconds before his conscious mind caught up. He wanted to put the phone down. He didn't. Nobody did. The timer chirped, and Braden Locke threw the first strike of his life that wasn't in a bracket. To understand what happened over the next 4 minutes, you have to go back a long way. Not to that November. Not to Emmanuel or the mop or the bucket. Further, Verna Colley was born in 1966 in North Preston, Nova Scotia. The largest black community in Canada, and one of the oldest, settled by people whose great-great-grandparents had been promised land and given rock. Her grandmother had been moved out of Africville with a city dump truck. Her mother cleaned rooms at a motel on the Bedford Highway and came home at midnight smelling of other people's cigarettes. Verna was tall for her age and quiet by nature, and in a place where the buses ran badly and the province forgot to pave things, quiet meant one of two things. You became invisible, or you became a target. Verna managed both. She got through grade 12 the way you get through a nor'easter, head down, moving, not looking up until it's over. The week after graduation, she took the bus into Halifax and walked into the recruiting office on Barrington Street and signed her name, Canadian Armed Forces. She was 18 years old, weighed 131 pounds, and had never been on an aeroplane. Basic training in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu took her apart and put her back together harder. She turned out to be good at it. Good at the discipline, good at the silence, good at the part where a man screams into your face for 30 seconds and you stand still and let him. She'd had practice, but it was close quarters that changed her life. The forces taught unarmed combat then the way they still do. Not as a sport, not for medals, not for anybody's highlight reel, for one purpose: to make a soldier survive the last 2 meters. Verna took to it like a woman who had been waiting her whole life for permission to be dangerous. She learned joint manipulation, how to steer a full-grown man across a room by one wrist. She learned chokes, the ones that put a person out in 4 seconds and the ones that make a person panic in 2, and why the second kind is worse. She learned how to take a man down on gravel, on ice, in the dark, in full kit, with a rucksack pulling her backward. She learned how to break an elbow with about a kilogram of pressure applied in exactly the wrong direction. She learned to use a man's own weight against him, so that he was on the ground before his brain had finished the sentence he was saying, and underneath every technique she learned the thing that mattered: minimum force, maximum control. You don't fight to prove anything. You fight to end something, and then you stop. By 25, she was instructing. By 32, she was running a training cell. By 44, she was Master Warrant Officer Colley, Chief Unarmed Combat Instructor at CFB Gagetown, and she had personally put more than 3,000 Canadian soldiers through close quarters training, soldiers who went on to Bosnia and Croatia and Bagotville and Kandahar, and a dozen places that never made the 6 o'clock news. She'd gone herself. Croatia in '93. Kandahar in '06, the bad summer, the one where the maple leaf came home in the belly of a Hercules more times than the country wanted to count. She never talked about either one. The fishhook scar on her forearm came from the second. She told Emmanuel it was a door hinge, and he pretended to believe her, and they both knew exactly what they were doing. She could have taught anywhere after that. Police services wanted her. A defense contractor in Ottawa offered her more money in a year than she'd made in 5. There were men with a tenth of her time in a training bay who were building second careers out of seminars and podcasts and merchandise. Verna retired at 55, moved back to Nova Scotia with Emmanuel, bought a bungalow with a bad carport, put her uniform in a garment bag in the crawl space, and let the calluses on her hands go soft, but not away. And she never told a soul in that town what she'd done, not out of shame, out of something harder to explain. In 1987, when she was 21 and home on leave and full of what she'd learned, a man in a bar on Gottingen Street put his hand on her and would not take it off. Verna had removed the hand. She'd also broken his elbow, his jaw in 2 places, and something in his shoulder that never healed right, and she'd done all of it in about a second and a half in front of 40 people. And afterward she stood there with her heart going like a snare drum, and understood something about herself that she has never once said out loud. She had enjoyed it. The charges went nowhere. The man had a record and no lawyer. But Verna went back to base and sat in the chapel for 2 hours in the dark, and when she came out she had made an agreement with herself that lasted 38 years. What a person has done should live in her hands, not in her mouth, and never, ever for an audience. So she hit the bag slow. She wrapped her hands the old way. She let the town believe she was a tired woman with a bucket, and now she was standing on a rubber mat across from a 26-year-old who had never once in his life been struck by somebody who meant it. And the timer had gone. He came out fast, a spinning kick, full rotation, the one from his pinned video, heel whipping toward her ribs. Verna stepped left, 15 centimeters. The heel went by close enough to move the cotton of her shirt. He didn't pause. Jab, cross, textbook, fast. Her head moved, and nothing else moved. Small tilts, 5 centimeters each, the punches passing through air where her face had been a tenth of a second before. She threw nothing back. He reset, bounced, front kick, testing. She turned it aside with an open palm the way you'd turn a doorknob. "You gonna fight?" Braden said. "Or just dance?" Verna said nothing, palms up. Elbows in, eyes on his chest. He came again with the combination he'd drilled 10,000 times. Low kick, switch to the head, spinning back fist. 3 strikes under 2 seconds, enough to bury anybody in his weight class. Verna dropped her hips to let the low kick slide. She bent her knees to let the head kick go over, and the back fist she caught. Not blocked, caught. Her hand closed around his fist and held it. 1 full second, long enough for everyone to see that she had chosen to hold it. And then she pushed it away from her, gently, so that he stumbled sideways into his own students. The gym went quiet, not the polite quiet of a crowd watching a match, the other kind. The quiet of 30 people watching something they don't have a word for. Braden looked at his own fist like it belonged to a stranger. "Lucky," he said. The second round he came out different. He didn't bounce. He didn't showboat. He walked to the middle of the mat the way you walk into a room where you already know what's waiting. Verna met him there. Same stance, same palms. Her breathing had not changed once since the timer started. He threw the jab. Fast, clean, technically perfect, worth 100 tournament points. Verna caught it in her right palm and redirected it past her ear, and before he could pull the arm back, her left hand was on his wrist. What happened next took under 2 seconds. Her right foot stepped behind his lead leg. Her left hand drew his wrist down and across his own body, taking his spine with it. Her hip turned, and Braden Locke came off the floor, went over and hit the mat flat on his back with a sound that slapped off the high ceiling of that old curling rink like a rifle shot. He rolled onto his side, gasping for air that had gone somewhere else. His gi was bunched at the shoulder. His belt had come loose, the knot half undone. "Stay down," somebody said from the crowd, not mocking, worried. The way you'd say it to a man walking toward the edge of something he can't see. He didn't stay down. He got up, and he retied the belt with hands that shook badly enough that the front row noticed, and then he did the one thing Verna had been quietly waiting for. The thing that always happens when the ego takes the wheel and the training goes out the window. He charged. No technique. No plan beyond forward. 200 pounds of humiliation traveling in a straight line with a wild looping right hand behind it, all the power in the world and no control at all. Verna stepped inside the arc, inside where the punch had no reach and no weight, inside where his entire right side hung open like a door somebody forgot to close. Inside where a woman who had spent 27 years teaching close quarters combat is the most dangerous thing in any building on earth. Her left hand took his swinging arm at the elbow. Her right went under his armpit and across his chest. Her hips turned, and she folded him into a standing arm lock and bent his elbow the wrong way by about 2 degrees. Not enough to injure. Not enough to leave anything behind. Just enough that every muscle in his body received the same message at the same instant, and the message was stop. Braden screamed. Not a shout, not a grunt. The sound a man makes when his body tells his brain something his brain has never heard before. It went through that building like a crack across ice. Verna held it for 1 second, then let go. He staggered back, cradling the arm, breathing in short, flat gulps, staring at her, the way a deer stares at the thing in the tree line it had not known was there. "We're done," Verna said. "Flat, not angry." The voice of a woman who had ended 1,000 bouts on a training floor and had never once needed to say it twice. He didn't hear her, or he heard the words, and they never reached whatever part of him was still deciding things. Because Braden Locke had never in 26 years been told, "We're done by anybody in any room," and something in him had come apart, and the only thing left was the last move he knew. He threw himself at her with a flying knee, his signature, the one on the shadow box wall, the one that ended 11 straight matches and built 180,000 followers and a sponsorship with a supplement company in Mississauga. Verna didn't catch it. She took one step to the side, and his knee found nothing but air, and before his front foot touched the mat she was behind him, one forearm across his collarbones. Not a choke, a steering wheel. Her other hand cupped the back of his head. Her knee went into the small of his back, and his feet left the floor. Then she put him down, not slammed. Placed. The way you set down something that will break if you're careless, and isn't worth the mess. His chest met the mat. Her knee settled between his shoulder blades. She laid one open hand against the back of his neck. Not squeezing, not hurting, just resting there, the way a full stop sits at the end of a sentence. He pushed. Nothing moved. He tried to roll. Nothing moved. His fingers scraped at the rubber. His cheek was flat against the floor he'd knocked her bucket over onto, and from that angle all he could see was the bottom of 30 pairs of shoes and a forest of raised phones. Verna bent low, close enough that only he could hear. "You asked what I do here every day." Her voice was barely a breath. "Now you know." She held it for 3 seconds. Then she stood, stepped back, and offered him her hand. He didn't take it. Nobody clapped, nobody cheered. There was no sound in that building at all, except the heaters and one man breathing. Verna walked to the bench, picked up her water bottle, drank, and began unwrapping her hands the way she unwrapped them every single morning, like it was nothing, like it was Tuesday. The silence lasted 11 seconds, somebody counted. Later, watching it back. Then a voice came from the back of the crowd. "Master Warrant Officer Colley." Verna's hands stopped. Her shoulders went still. It was a small thing, almost nothing, and it was the first time all morning that Verna Colley had looked like she'd been caught off guard. A man pushed to the front. Early 40s. Barrel chest, a haircut growing out just enough to say he'd been out of uniform a few years, but not long enough to have forgotten the habit. Truro Police Service windbreaker. A faded tattoo on his left forearm that matched the one on hers, only his was newer, and the ink still had its edges. Sergeant Émile Godet, formerly Corporal, Royal Canadian Regiment. He came to a stop about 2 meters from her and stood. You could see him decide not to, and do it anyway. Very straight. "Gagetown," he said. 2007. You put me through unarmed combat and you failed me twice. Verna looked at him for a long moment. Something crossed her face, quick and warm, and was put away immediately. Godet. A breath that was almost a laugh. "You couldn't fall properly to save your life. You made me do it 400 times until I could." He shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, you made me do it 400 times. Nobody in the crowd was breathing. Heads swung between them like people watching a match played in a language they'd never heard. Then Sergeant Godet turned around and faced the room, and when he spoke, it was not a shout. It was the other thing. The voice men use when they need every ear in a building. For anybody here who doesn't understand what they just watched, let me explain it to you. He pointed at Verna, who had already started shaking her head, jaw tight, a woman who wanted this to stop and knew it wasn't going to. That woman trained me. She trained my whole section. She trained soldiers who went to Kandahar the year we lost 36 of them, and some of them came home, and I would not bet money that all of them come home if somebody else had been standing on that training floor. He took out his phone, scrolled, turned the screen out toward the crowd. An old photograph, grainy, overexposed at the edges, red-brown New Brunswick dirt. A younger Verna Colley in combats, mid-motion, folding a soldier who outweighed her by 40 kilos into an arm lock that was so clean it looked staged. Behind her, 3 rows of soldiers watching in formation. A pine tree line. The date printed in the corner. Chief Unarmed Combat Instructor. 27 years. Better than 3,000 soldiers. He put the phone away and turned, finally, to look down at Braden Locke, who was sitting up now, propped on one elbow, listening. "You just asked a woman who spent her whole life teaching Canadian soldiers how to end a fight to spar you for laughs." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, and you could watch the rings go out through the crowd, people looking at Verna, looking at the crest on her forearm. looking at the way she stood there, unwrapping her hands, feet apart, shoulders square, chin tucked. The stance that never switched off because it had never been a stance at all. It was just the shape she'd been built into. Braden sat all the way up. His belt lay on the mat beside him, unwound, white and limp and meaningless as a shed skin. He didn't pick it up. He looked at her, actually looked. Not at the gray t-shirt. Not at her age. Not at her color, which he had spent 3 weeks making jokes about while 9 phones recorded him doing it. At the woman. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice had nothing left in it. "Why didn't you say who you were?" Verna finished the right hand. She folded the wrap in half and in half again and set it on the bench beside her. "Because the ones who tell you what they are," she said, "usually aren't it anymore." Roy Pelletier leaned against the wall and let out a long breath through his nose. Hazel Amiral put her hand over her mouth and left it there. Sergeant Gaudet stood at attention without meaning to. An old body, remembering an old room. And Nolan Baudry, 19 from Stewiacke, lowered his phone for the first time in 20 minutes, not because he'd decided to, but because his arm had gotten too heavy to hold up. The video went online by 2 that afternoon. Not from Braden's page. From a 17-year-old with a gym membership who'd happened to be standing at the right angle at the right second. Guy challenged the janitor. Janitor was a master warrant officer. By midnight, 400,000 views. By Sunday, 2.6 million. The comments turned into their own kind of war. People tagging their fathers, arguing about grappling, writing paragraphs about respect, and what a person owes to somebody they've decided is nobody. A woman in Winnipeg wrote that she'd been a nurse for 31 years, and every young doctor she met looked straight through her, and that comment had 40,000 likes by Tuesday. Braden's old clips got dug up and hung around his neck. Levels. All of it recontextualized now by 19 seconds of a 26-year-old face pressed sideways into a rubber mat. He took the page down that night. 4 years of it, gone. His students texted. He didn't answer. His mother called twice. He let it ring. Nolan Baudry drove to the gym on Saturday and deleted his own video off his own account, and then, because he was 19 and had never done anything like it in his life, he found Verna in the parking lot, loading her bucket into the trunk of a Corolla, and said, out loud, in the cold, "I'm sorry." I laughed, every time. I knew it was wrong, and I laughed anyway because he was watching. Verna closed the trunk. She looked at that boy for a while. "That's the hardest one to stop doing," she said. "Come Tuesday, 6 o'clock. 3 days went by. Truro went back to being Truro. Roy sold a snowblower belt. Hazel poured coffee. The news van from Halifax got tired and went home. Verna Colley came in at 6:30, hit the bag, did her pull-ups, exactly the same. On the 4th morning, the door opened at 5:58, before the regulars, before the parking lot lights had finished warming up. Braden Locke walked in. No gi, no students, no phone. Gray hoodie, sweatpants, and a pair of running shoes that had plainly never touched a road. He came to the corner and stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor she'd mopped. "I owe you an apology." Verna kept rapping. "Okay, not just for Friday, for all of it. The things I said. He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things, and you were just the one standing closest." She finished the rap, tucked the end, looked up. "I know. Would you teach me? Teach you what?" "Whatever it is you know that I don't." Verna looked at him a long time, at the kid underneath the belt and the brand and the 180,000 strangers, at a young man who had never once been broken and did not yet understand that breaking is where the building starts. She picked up the mop and held it out to him, handle first. He took it. He didn't say anything about it, which she noted. "Tomorrow," she said. 5 o'clock. "Do the floor first." "Why the floor?" "Because you'll fight on it," Verna said, "and you don't know one thing about a floor until you've had to clean it." He showed up at 4:52, and the morning after that, and every morning that winter, no filming, no audience, no highlight reel. Just a 59-year-old woman and a young man and a heavy bag with electrician's tape around the split in a building that used to be a curling rink, while the sun came up gray over the Cobequid Hills. She never called him son. She never made a speech. She never told him a single story about Croatia or Kandahar or the man on Göttingen Street. She showed him how to wrap his hands properly. He'd been doing it wrong for 11 years. They started there. So he came back with no camera and no crowd, and the first thing he learned from her was how to mop a floor and how to tape a wrist. And if you want to know what changed him, it wasn't getting put on his back. Men get put on their backs every day and get up meaner. What changed him was that nobody filmed it, and she still bothered to teach him. Verna Colley trained 3,000 soldiers and never told one person in that town. Not the hardware store, not the church basement, not her own neighbors. Braden Locke spent 4 years telling 180,000 strangers exactly who he was, every day, in 40-second increments. One of them needed the world to watch. The other one just needed a bag and a bucket and the quiet. And I think that's the line, isn't it? Not between winning and losing. Between being a fighter and being something harder to name. So let me ask you what I've been asking myself since I first heard this story. What is the difference between having strength and performing it? How many rooms have you walked into already knowing everything, only to find out you hadn't started learning? And if the strongest person you'll ever meet says nothing about it at all? What does that make all our noise? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one of them. If this one stayed with you, pass it along to somebody who needs it. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Nobody hands out a certificate for the lessons that matter. They never have.